Welcome to the complete comic book history of the Dark Knight. I am Salazar Knight, and these are the last 3 years in the Silver Age of Batman. In the previous episode, we checked the comic history of Batman during 1966 and the early 1967. These years were extremely important for Batman, but not because of the comics. The Batman TV show with Adam West was a complete success, and as a result, the comics started to imitate the style of the show. However, the show ended and things had to be changed. On this last episode of the Silver Bat, we will take a look at what happens when the novelty is over and the camp style is no longer wanted. So let's begin. In the mid-1967, the show was still quite popular, and for this reason the comics remained the same, trying to copy that style. But by the end of that same year, the audience was tired of that TV show and the ratings descended. The show was no longer wanted, and that also showed in the comics. Since the TV show was still on TV, the editor and writers of the comics still used the same formula. But the readers were getting tired of it. They wanted the real Batman, not the funny clown of the TV. Editor Julio Schwartz noticed that the comics were losing the audience, and so he started to make the change, but slowly. Schwartz didn't want to just change everything overnight, so he started mixing stories between camp and serious. He asked the writers to come up with campy stories, and the art for those comics was assigned to Bob Kane, who didn't really do the art, but that's another story. And then Schwartz also asked the writers to come up with serious stories, with a bit of a darker tone, and for those comics, the art was done by the legendary Carmine Infantino, who was the artist responsible for the redesign of Batman from this to this. As a result, some great stories were created, such as the ones in Detective Comics 366 and 367. In these comics, Batman is forced to act against his will and he becomes part of a killing cycle from which he is unable to break free. He manages to save his victims' lives, but he can't fight against the criminals. In order to solve this mystery, he leaves Robin a clue written as his last will, and Robin manages to solve the extremely complex message. When Robin locates Batman, he breaks the Dark Knight out of his trance, and Batman is finally able to capture the criminal. Now, these kind of stories were amazingly good. The plot and the art were magnificent. Meanwhile, in almost every other issue, this is what Bob Kane was doing. So that's why for the most part of this video we're only going to focus on the good stories. During a mission near a swamp, Batman was infected by a rare fever and Batgirl deduced this condition. Without alarming Batman, she decided to help him on his nightly patrol, but in order to do so, she required Robin's help and she asked the Teen Wonder to join her for the next night. Robin gladly accepted, and Batman thought that Robin was replacing him for Batgirl. In reality, Batgirl and Robin tried to prevent Batman from overworking and falling victim to the fever. Despite their efforts, Batman became ill and he was eventually treated in his Bruce Wayne identity. While Bruce was recovering, Batgirl and Robin worked together and they became the new heroes of Gotham. This was bad news for someone who was a bit jealous of Batgirl. Feeling that the female counterpart of Batman is a dangerous threat, Catwoman decides to come back from retirement to show the new girl who is the best woman around. Yes, after 13 years, Catwoman returns to the Batman comics, and what a comeback she made. But before we go over to Catwoman's comeback, I just have to mention a certain panel from Brave and the Bold number 74, in which Batman grabs a flagpole and performs a great stunt while he says this. Here's one I did before anybody, including a certain web-spinning Peter come lately. Just to show that DC was feeling the danger as Spider-Man became more popular than Batman. Anyway, moving on to Catwoman. She returns with a new costume and starts a campaign to make Batgirl look bad, but her plan backfires when Batgirl is the one who helps Batman and Robin put her away. And that's how a comeback should not be done. This story had a lot of potential, but it was destroyed when it was given to Bob Kane. The camp style he was supposed to follow very much ruined the whole story. But that's not the worst of all. Kane didn't even draw the story. You see, this guy was known for having several ghost artists making his job while he kept signing the comics as if he had done the art. In Batman 196 you can see how awful his art is supposed to be. Well, this was actually Sheldon Moldoff trying to create a mixture between Bob Kane's horrendous art style and Carmine Infantino's masterpieces. When DC started to consider bringing new artists, Kane felt threatened as he was already on his way out. He hadn't done real art in a comic for decades and it was impossible for him to keep up with the new and great artists around. So what did he do? He just hired another ghost artist, one that could imitate Carmine Infantino better than Moldoff. In the Catwoman story you can clearly see a difference, just so you get an idea. This is Bob Kane's actual art. This is Sheldon Moldoff's art. And this is Frank Springer, the new ghost artist for Bob Kane. No artist changes his style so much in so little time. It's not possible. Yet Kane was still signing the books with his name in the front page. A real nice guy, that Bob, huh? Besides the whole Bill Finger situation, which was bad already, what bothers me the most is that for nearly 3 decades the guy was credited as the artist for many Batman stories, which he didn't do. And some young people of that generation were fooled by this man. In a couple of fan letters printed in the comics, people praise how much Kane had improved since the Golden Age, even to the point of suggesting that it almost seemed as if he was another person. These letters were cleverly picked by Julius Schwartz to give the readers a clue about the truth of Bob Kane. However, there are good news coming up. Because of Marvel's success, DC was hiring new artists and writers to improve their comics, and we're going to see what happens when they come around. But before going to that part of the history, there's something interesting taking place in the comics. The Batman TV show was on its way out, but before leaving there was one last change it created in the comic books, and that change was Mr. Freeze. We talked about Mr. Zero in our previous videos, but he disappeared from the comics since the 50s. After more than 10 years, he makes a comeback as Mr. Freeze with a redesigned costume. Both the new name and the new costume are taken directly from the TV show, but this would be the last element adapted. Even in this comic, the writers started to make fun of the fact that they have been influenced by the show. There's a panel in Detective Comics 373 in which Robin says this: Mr. Freeze! That sounds like a campy name dreamed up for a villain in a television program. And that was the official reintroduction of Mr. Freeze to the comics, thanks to the campy Batman. But that was the last change, as the show was cancelled shortly after this comic. However, there was an aftermath to the TV show. After it was cancelled, the Batman comics needed to expand some information that had not been updated since the Golden Age. One of these elements was the layout of the Batcave and the contents of the utility belt. In a larger splash page, a new design for the Batcave was introduced, and for the first time it features the Batcomputer and special hiding places for the Batboat, Batplane and Batcopter. Of course, over the years this layout was completely forgotten. And now it's time to talk about the new artists and writers. By the time the new people arrived, it was the end of 1968. The artists that were working on Batman would have very different futures from this point onwards. Bob Kane was officially removed and never worked again for DC or any other comic book publisher, while Carmine Infantino was promoted to editorial director of DC. Meanwhile, the writers Gardner Fox and John Broome retired from the Batman books, and Schwartz hired Frank Robbins. This man created serious stories like Operation Blindfold in Batman 204 and 205, and Batman Drop Dead Twice in Detective Comics 378 and 379. However, because Schwartz wanted to change things slowly, Robbins came up with the stories that still had a bit of campy and comedy. The new artist for Detective Comics was Bob Brown, who really maintained the camp-style art. Meanwhile, in Batman, the main artist was Irv Novick, a great experienced artist known for his work in Wonder Woman. And while he tried to make Batman look a bit darker, he still had to use the same campy design. And when I say campy design, I mean mainly the short ears and very short cape, almost like in the Batman TV show. So there wasn't really a change. And then another artist appeared and changed everything. Neil Adams was already working for DC on titles like The Spectre, Strange Adventures, and he was also creating many covers for DC. His style was very new and fresh, and when he illustrated Brave and the Bold number 79, it was obvious that he was needed in the Batman comics. Brave and the Bold number 79 featured Deadman and Batman together for the first time, and Neil Adams' style was perfect for Batman. He managed to make the Silver Age design look much more intimidating and dark simply by making his ears bigger and the cape longer. Neil Adams is in fact one of the people responsible for starting the Bronze Age of comics in 1970, when he started working on the Batman comics. And now, as we come to the end of the series, let's just take a quick look at the last year of the Silver Age. In Batman 208, we learned that after Bruce's parents were killed, he was taken in by his uncle Philip Wayne. While living with his uncle, Bruce became good friends with Philip's housekeeper, Mrs. Chilton. And if that name sounds familiar, it's simply because she was the mother of Joe Chill, the man who killed Batman's parents. Quite a twist, isn't it? And Bruce doesn't know the truth even as an adult. Now remember, this is still the Batman from Earth 1, so this information does not apply for the modern version of Batman. After that shocking revelation came Batman 209, and yes, we can clearly see that the Silver Age refused to die even in the last year. And then we have Detective Comics 384, which features the first of many Batgirl solo stories. For these stories, Gil Kane was hired as the main artist, and he was notable for his work in Green Lantern and Spider-Man. When Kane was assigned the Batgirl comics, he decided to change Barbara's style from the Princess Leia hairstyle into a nice long straight hair. If anything, she looked very similar to a certain Mary Jane, if you ask me. Then another girl was redesigned as well. Batman 210 introduced a new costume for Catwoman, one that was very different from all her previous outfits. Wearing a cat mask, spandex, boots and a tail, this version looks much similar to the modern Catwoman, but still not quite there yet. And finally, there were only 3 more good things that came out of the Silver Age in Batman. The first one was the complete redesign of Green Arrow. The new version featured his battlesuit and his iconic goatee. But wait, what does it have to do with Batman, you might ask? Well, it all happened in the Batman title Brave and the Bold number 85, where the Emerald Archer was improved and, guess who was the genius behind this amazing change? That's right, Neil Adams. Once again, this man showed how important he was for DC Comics and the whole industry as well. The second good thing to come up from the Silver Age was Alfred's last name. Up until that moment in 1969, Alfred was only known as Alfred, just Alfred. The only last name he was given was during the Golden Age, and we have that story in the Golden Bat series, so make sure to check it out. Back in the Golden Age, he was called Alfred Beagle, but it was never really used, and soon, people forgot about that name. In Batman 216, we finally learned that Alfred's last name is Pennyworth, and this is the official name that every other Alfred has used ever since. Of course, the name Pennyworth really first appeared in a newspaper strip back in the 50s, but this was the first time it was made official in the comics. And finally, the last good thing from the Silver Age in Batman, the change that officially ended the Silver Age. Dick Grayson graduated from high school and moved out of Wayne Manor to go to college. Alfred and Bruce were all alone after almost 30 years. Batman and Robin were no more. But the change didn't end there. Without Robin, Bruce knew that Batman would become the dark figure of the night once again, and in order to keep up with modern criminals, he moved out of Wayne Manor as well and went to live on the penthouse of the Wayne Foundation building along with Alfred. Wayne Manor and the Batcave were abandoned, and once again, after 3 decades of existence, Batman was working alone. And all of this happened in Batman 217, the last Batman comic of 1969. And that, my friends, is the end of the Silver Bat. As you can see, the Silver Age ends with Batman going back to his original form, a loner, dark figure who never gives up his fight against crime. And now, get ready, because on the upcoming episodes we will start the last big saga in the complete comic book history of the Dark Knight, when we go year by year with the Bronze Bat.